There was a time when Andrew Windsor moved through royal corridors as if the walls themselves bowed in his direction. Power wasn't something he asked for, it was something he expected, the natural air he breathed. But today, those same halls feel colder, sharper, almost hostile. The quiet that surrounds him isn't respect. It's the kind that follows a downfall so steep that even the people who once followed orders without hesitation now look through him as if he's already gone. It's a strange sight. A man who built his life on status and privilege, now spending his days inside Royal Lodge like a guest who overstayed the invitation long ago. Each morning feels like another reminder that the world he once ruled no longer exists, and the institution that once shielded him has quietly stepped back, letting the weight of consequences settle where protection used to be. And the most shocking part? The royal family has already decided exactly how this story ends, and it's nothing like the future he imagined.
Royal Lodge was once Andrew Windsor's private kingdom, a sprawling estate where he felt untouchable, insulated, and permanently anchored within the royal world he grew up in. But lately, the atmosphere inside those walls has shifted so dramatically that even long-time staff describe the place as unrecognizable. The energy that once followed him, the hurried footsteps, the lowered voices, the constant movement, has faded into something far more revealing: stillness. And it's that stillness that tells the real story. The staff who remain now operate with a level of formality that wasn't there before. Not cold, not disrespectful, just strictly procedural, as if they're following a new rulebook written somewhere far above Royal Lodge. Gone are the small gestures of deference that used to surround him. Everything is intentional, measured, and unmistakably distant. It's the kind of shift that doesn't need to be announced to be understood. What makes it even heavier is the contrast. Royal Lodge, with its wide halls and quiet gardens, was once a symbol of continuity, a place where nothing seemed to change no matter what storms hit the royal family. But now, every corner feels like a reminder that things have changed, and they're not going back. Even the silence has a different weight, as if the building itself knows his time there is running out. The tension surrounding the property dispute only amplifies it. The battle over whether he can remain in the 30-room estate has turned the house into a stage for a struggle he's desperately trying not to lose. And each week that passes makes the situation feel less like a negotiation and more like an ending slowly closing in. But the shift in atmosphere is only the surface. The real break came when the privileges he once relied on, the symbols that kept him tethered to royal life, began disappearing one by one. And that's where the story gets even heavier.
If the atmosphere at Royal Lodge feels like the air before a storm, the removal of Andrew Windsor's privileges was the lightning strike that made everything impossible to ignore. His fall wasn't sudden, it unfolded piece by piece, in a series of decisions that quietly dismantled the life he once assumed would last forever. The first blow came when he was stripped of his military affiliations and public patronages. For someone who built so much of his identity around formal roles, uniforms, and ceremonial presence, this was more than a line on a press release. It was the moment he realized the institution he once relied on was drawing a firm, permanent boundary. Then came the restriction on using his former style, a symbolic shift that carried far more weight behind palace walls than the public realized. In the royal world, titles aren't just labels, they're currency. They open doors, soften consequences, and maintain the invisible hierarchy that keeps the entire system running. Losing that wasn't a formality, it was a statement. But the most impactful change was financial. Without the duties he once performed, the support that came with those roles faded too. Suddenly, the royal machinery that once handled logistics, appearances, and daily comfort stepped back. Services that were previously automatic, transport, staffing, palace management resources, became limited or disappeared altogether. These weren't random adjustments. They were calculated signals sent through the language the monarchy understands best: ritual, rank, and restriction. And every shift reinforced the same message. The institution is moving forward, and Andrew is no longer part of that movement. For a man who spent decades believing royal structure existed to support him, the sudden absence of that structure shook more than his status. It shook the foundation he built his entire life upon. But the real pain wasn't in losing titles or roles. It came from a place far more personal, from the people who once stood beside him, now stepping quietly away. And that's where the story cuts even deeper.
If losing roles and privileges felt like the walls closing in, the shift within the family made the ground disappear beneath him. For Andrew Windsor, the royal family was more than an institution. It was the last place where he believed loyalty would outweigh consequence. But over the past year, even that final refuge has grown colder, quieter, and unmistakably distant. The first real sign came through subtle changes. Invitations that used to arrive without question suddenly required confirmation. Meetings became shorter. Conversations that once included him began happening without him. And then came the moment that made the situation impossible to misinterpret. Reports that he and Sarah Ferguson were no longer being included in major royal holiday gatherings. For a family that values tradition more than almost anything, exclusion from events like Christmas at Sandringham wasn't a logistical decision. It was symbolic, a signal that the royal household is drawing a line between past association and future stability. The message was careful but unmistakable. The institution is protecting itself, and certain shadows can no longer be allowed near the center. It hit harder because these gatherings were among the last remaining pieces of his old life. For decades, holidays offered the reassurance that no matter the headlines or the rumors, he was still part of the inner circle. He still belonged. But now even that space is being reorganized around the need to protect the monarchy's image, and that means some doors must quietly close. The reshuffling of living arrangements pushes the point further. Discussions around relocating him from Royal Lodge to a smaller residence on the Sandringham estate have been widely reported, a change he has resisted at every turn. To him it feels like exile. To the institution it feels like necessary distance. And as the royal family moves forward with a slimmer, more tightly controlled public presence, it's becoming increasingly clear that there is no role, public or private, waiting for Andrew in the future they're shaping. The separation isn't loud or dramatic. It's slow, deliberate, and carried out through the kind of quiet decisions that shape legacies without ever needing to be spoken. But while the family pulls away, the outside world is closing in with its own pressure, and that's where the scrutiny becomes impossible to escape. While the royal family tightened the circle around itself, the outside world was already shaping a narrative that Andrew Windsor couldn't outrun. His reputation didn't just fade, it was rewritten in real time across headlines, documentaries, interviews, and endless commentary that turned him into one of the most discussed figures in modern royal history. Every major development in his life became instant global news. Decisions that would have once been handled quietly behind palace walls were suddenly front-page stories, dissected by analysts, journalists, and viewers who had already chosen their side. And the more the institution stepped away from him, the faster the public conversation grew. His legal settlement, publicly acknowledged, widely reported, and endlessly debated, became a defining moment in the media narrative. Even though the settlement included no admission of wrongdoing, the sheer gravity of the case transformed the way the world viewed him. It marked a turning point where public perception detached from royal tradition and attached itself to something far more unforgiving: scrutiny without mercy. Every appearance, every photo, every rumor sparked waves of discussion. Commentators questioned his future, his role, his finances, his relationships, even his place within the monarchy's long-term plans. What once would have been private matters now played out under a magnifying glass held by millions. And the impact was irreversible. The public no longer saw Andrew as a figure shaped by titles or ceremony. They saw a man whose life had been overtaken by controversy, whose past decisions cast a shadow that no palace statement could fully dispel. The media coverage didn't just follow him, it defined him. Even attempts to rehabilitate his image were short-lived. Any small step forward was immediately overshadowed by renewed debates about his past, ensuring that the narrative never drifted far from the controversy that reshaped his life. It became clear that the story wasn't about a temporary setback, it was about a permanent shift in how the world sees him. And as the scrutiny grew louder, another reality settled in, one that had less to do with headlines and more to do with what the future holds for a man now living outside the institution that once protected him. Because the next chapter isn't about reputation anymore, it's about what happens when influence disappears.
As the public narrative hardened and the royal family pulled further away, Andrew Windsor found himself in a position he never expected to face, navigating a future with no clear path, no official role, and no protective barrier between him and the consequences of his past. The world he once relied on, the structure, the hierarchy, the automatic authority, has dissolved, leaving him standing in a life that feels unfamiliar and increasingly fragile. Royal Lodge, the home he refuses to surrender, has become both his refuge and his battleground. The spacious rooms that once symbolized his permanence now feel like a countdown clock. Reports of ongoing pressure for him to relocate to a smaller residence signal that the royal household is ready to close this chapter, even if he isn't. What was once a privilege is now a negotiation he seems destined to lose, and every delay only emphasizes how much has changed. The truth is, the future being shaped for him is narrower than anything he imagined. Without royal duties, his public presence has faded to almost nothing. Without the institutional support that once followed him everywhere, daily life has become quieter, heavier, and far more isolated. And without a clear role in the royal family's plans, his influence, once his greatest asset, has evaporated completely. It's a rare situation for someone born into the inner circle of the monarchy, a life defined not by duties or appearances, but by absence. No engagements, no invitations, no responsibilities. Just the slow unraveling of a man adjusting to a world that no longer bends around him. For the monarchy, moving forward means rebuilding public trust and controlling its image with absolute precision. For Andrew, moving forward means facing a future that offers no spotlight, no status, and no guaranteed place in the institution that shaped him. The contrast between those two paths couldn't be sharper. And as the royal family tightens its focus on the next generation, the message becomes clearer with each passing month. Whatever role he once played is gone, and whatever life he expected to return to no longer exists. His story is no longer about recovery, it's about reckoning, with decisions that can't be undone, with a reputation that can't be rebuilt, and with a future that no longer includes the power he once believed was permanent.
And as the final pieces of that world fall away, one question remains. What does a life look like when everything that once defined it has disappeared?